Hey, everybody. Welcome to Grace with Paul Gray. Appreciate you all joining me today. You know, we men don't like to ask for help. We don't like to ask for directions. A lot of things we don't like to ask for. I don't know why. I wish it wasn't that way, but it just is. Today we have MapQuest, GPS, things like that. And I've learned to use that. I was a little reluctant at first because I thought I knew how to get everywhere. Sometimes MapQuest doesn't give you the right information. Have you ever experienced that? We also use Google Maps. My wife will use that. I use MapQuest. And we've tried to go places before with each one of us having that on our phone app and literally it give us different directions. I found out recently that if you have an iPhone or an Android and use like MapQuest or Google Maps, you can get different directions just because you have a different kind of phone. I don't understand all of that, but the point is when you have an app that you use for anything, it's only as good as the information that's in it. The information can be good most of the time, but as a recent TV ad says, good enough is not always good enough, is it? I had a mentor at one time who was like a God app. You could ask him a question and he'd quote a Bible verse for any question that you ask. I'm a little dense, and most of the time I didn't understand, okay, well, what does that verse mean? How does that apply to the question I ask? And then he would give me his understanding of that. Well, I trusted his knowledge of the Bible and his insight and everything, but I've since come to know that even though he was a great guy, a wonderful guy, he was misinformed about some different things, and the interpretation that he had about certain verses I no longer believe is correct. Which would you rather have? Information about God that somebody else, some group of people, some people with an agenda decided was true and put into an app, and then you ask a question and you, like the God app, but suppose we had a God app and you ask a question and you would get an answer that was based on information that a group of people with a denominational or a doctrinal agenda had put together. Would you like to have that, or would you rather hear from God himself? Well, that's a rhetorical question, but I think obviously we'd like to hear from God himself. And the good news is, of course, that we can and we do. John wrote in John 1:9, Jesus was the true light, which coming into the world enlightens every man. There he was, the true light, the genuine, perfect, steadfast light, the Amplified says, which coming into the world enlightens everyone. That's one of those passages that, how did we miss that? Jesus enlightens everyone, not just some, but everyone. How did we miss that? I don't know. Matthew 6:22, Amplified Version. Jesus speaking here, and he says, the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is clear, spiritually perceptive, your whole body will be full of light, benefiting from God's precepts. But if your eye is bad, spiritually blind, your whole body will be full of darkness, devoid of God's precepts. So if the very light inside you, your inner self, your heart, your conscience, is darkness, how great and terrible is that darkness? See, the light that we have is either Jesus or something else that's going to be dark. Matthew 6:24 goes on to say this in the Passion Translation. How could you worship two gods at the same time? You'll have to hate one and love the other, or to be devoted to one and despise the other. Two gods at the same time. We're going to look at that this week. Isaiah, speaking for God, the prophet said this in Isaiah 5:20, woe to those who call good evil and evil good. Woe to those who put darkness for light and light for darkness. Now, I used to think that meant, well, If I say, okay, lying is good because it helps me get ahead in business or something like that, that's calling evil good, and God's going to get me for that. Well, I've come to understand that's not what Isaiah was talking about. When we think that evil is good or good is evil, woe is going to come upon us, not because of God, but just because of the darkness that's in us. See, Adam and Eve didn't need an app. They had God with them. They hung out with God. They abided with God. They only knew God. Then they were tempted by an evil voice, and the voice told them about a small g God who was holding out on them. And it said that that small g God wasn't totally good. And they chose to believe that evil voice. And as a result, they believed the lie that God, who was light and who was only good, was evil. And they believed that evil, that was dark and no good, was actually good. They believed the lies that God was angry with them and was going to punish them and had separated himself from us, that they were God enemies. See, none of that was true. That was all darkness. They were listening to the wrong app, if you will. Well, we do actually have a good app, a God app. The problem is there are two God apps. The real good God app and the fictitious, evil, small g God app. We can listen to either one. And if we don't know the difference and we listen to the small g fictitious God app, the light in us is going to be darkness. And how great is that darkness? If we listen to the fictitious God, we're going to be full of darkness, but think that it's light. Well, the rest of this week, we're going to compare those two. I think this will be really helpful to you. It certainly has been to me. We've been talking about this with our group in Lawrence, Kansas, and it's been helpful to a lot of us. So look forward to visiting with you next time. See you then. Thanks, everybody.